Welcome to Clutch Time Update. Eastern Conference Preseason Final Standings. Orlando Magic, undefeated for 2-0. New York Knicks, 4 wins, 1 loss. Boston Celtics and Milwaukee Bucks, 3-1 each. Toronto Raptors, 4-2. Chicago Bulls, 3-2. Indiana Pacers, Detroit Pistons. Atlanta Hawks, Brooklyn Nets, all at 2-2. Charlotte Hornets, 2-3. Washington Wizards, 1-2. Cleveland Cavaliers and Philadelphia 76ers, 1-3. Miami Heat, 0-6 winless this preseason. Western Conference Preseason Final Standings. San Antonio Spurs, undefeated 5-0. Houston Rockets, 4-0. LA Clippers, Dallas Mavericks, Phoenix Suns, 3-1 each. OKC Thunder, 4-2. Warriors and Nuggets, 3-2. Pelicans, 2-2. Timberwolves, 2-4. Kings, Jazz, Blazers, 1-3. Grizzlies, 1-4. Lakers, 1-5. NBA regular season schedule October 22nd, November 1st. October 22nd opening day PH time, 7:30 a.m. OKC Thunder vs Houston Rockets, 10 a.m. Lakers vs Warriors. October 23rd, 7 a.m. Knicks vs Cavaliers, Hornets vs Nets, Magic vs Heat, 7:30 a.m. Hawks vs Raptors, Celtics vs 76ers. 8 a.m. Bulls vs Pistons, Grizzlies vs Pelicans, Bucks vs Wizards. 9 a.m. Jazz vs Clippers. 9:30 a.m. Mavericks vs Spurs. 10 a.m. Suns vs Kings, Blazers vs Timberwolves. October 24th Friday, 7:30 a.m. Pacers vs Thunder. 10 a.m. Warriors vs Nuggets. October 25th, 7 a.m. Magic vs Hawks. 7:30 a.m. Knicks vs Celtics. Nets vs Cavs, Raptors vs Bucks. 8 a.m. Rockets vs Pistons, Grizzlies vs Heat, Pelicans vs Spurs. 8:30 a.m. Mavericks vs Wizards. 10 a.m. Lakers vs Timberwolves, Blazers vs Warriors, Kings vs Jazz. 10:30 a.m. Clippers vs Suns. October 26th Sunday, 7 a.m. Magic vs Bulls. 7:30 a.m. Hawks vs Thunder, 76ers vs Hornets. 8 a.m. Grizzlies vs Pacers. 9 a.m. Nuggets vs Suns. October 27th Monday, 2 a.m. Spurs vs Nets. 3:30 a.m. Pistons vs Celtics. 6 a.m. Cavs vs Bucks, Wizards vs Hornets, Heat vs Knicks. 7 a.m. Timberwolves vs Pacers. 7:30 a.m. Mavericks vs Raptors. 9 a.m. Clippers vs Blazers, Kings vs Lakers. October 28th, 7 a.m. Pistons vs Cavs, 76ers vs Magic. 8 a.m. Bulls vs Hawks, Rockets vs Nets, Pelicans vs Celtics. Spurs vs Raptors. 8:30 a.m. Mavericks vs Thunder. 9 a.m. Jazz vs Suns. 9:30 a.m. Timberwolves vs Nuggets. 10 a.m. Warriors vs Grizzlies. 10:30 a.m. Lakers vs Blazers. October 29th, 7 a.m. Wizards vs 76ers. 7:30 a.m. Heat vs Hornets. 8 a.m. Bucks vs Knicks, Thunder vs Kings. 11 a.m. Warriors vs Clippers. October 30th, 7 a.m. Celtics vs Cavs, Pistons vs Magic. 7:30 a.m. Nets vs Hawks, Raptors vs Rockets. 8 a.m. Bulls vs Kings. 8:30 a.m. Mavericks vs Pacers. 9 a.m. Nuggets vs Pelicans, Jazz vs Blazers. 9:30 a.m. Timberwolves vs Lakers. 10 a.m. Suns vs Grizzlies. October 31st, 7 a.m. Hornets vs Magic. 8 a.m. Bucks vs Warriors, Thunder vs Wizards. 8:30 a.m. Spurs vs Heat. November 1st, 7 a.m. Pacers vs Hawks, 76ers vs Celtics. 7:30 a.m. Cavs vs Raptors. 8 a.m. Bulls vs Knicks. 9:30 a.m. Grizzlies vs Lakers. 10 a.m. Blazers vs Nuggets, Suns vs Jazz. 10:30 a.m. Clippers vs Pelicans. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel.